This week on The Wheelhouse. Media manipulation. Using AI to sell a story and distort politics. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. The shooting of Renee Good by a federal immigration agent. The U.S. capture of Venezuela's former president, Nicolas Maduro. A war in the air and on the internet between the U.S. and Iran. This hour, we're taking a look at how artificial intelligence is influencing the news and media. We'll also explore AI's pull on politics and ask, is AI imposing a new barrier on media literacy? Alyssa Appelman, an associate professor in the William White School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Kansas University. Dr. Appelman, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So happy to have you on here, as well as Renee Hobbs, the founder of the Media Education Lab, a professor of communication at the Harrington School of Communication and Media at the University of Ireland. Good morning, Dr. Hobbs. So glad to have you aboard here. Alyssa, I'm going to ask you a question. Also want to tell folks they can give us a call, 888-720-9677 this morning, 888-720-9677, if they'd like to join in on the conversation. Alyssa, you spent the last decade or so researching trust in news media, and recently you focused on how consumers feel about AI being used in journalism. Based on your understanding, how is AI actually being used versus maybe how consumers might think it's being used?
That's a great question. Yes. And I think that's a big part of the conversation, which I'm very glad that you brought this up, because part of what's going on is that because AI is such a new tool for journalists and for everybody, there's a disconnect between what journalists are using the tool for and what people think they're using the tool for. So there's just a lot of confusion about the role of AI. In my studies, what I have found is that journalists are often using AI for maybe like transcribing interviews, for example, or analyzing large data sets. But there's a concern from readers and listeners that what's going on is completely fabricated stories, right? Which of course is sometimes happening, but that disconnect between kind of what professional journalists are doing, what readers think they might be doing, what some not professional journalists are doing, or people who are also sharing content online are using technology for being different than maybe what professional journalists are using AI for. So, yes.
We all love data journalism. There's that aggregating and disaggregation of large data sets, as we know, that AI can help with. As you mentioned, some folks are using things like Otter to transcribe long interviews and things of that nature. There's also the other side where some news organizations, as I understand it, are starting to have AI take the first pass at writing stories, which is a big no-no in our industry, or at least would be at Connecticut Public. And there's also, I guess, proliferating of media that journalists may cover if they don't know whether or not it's not true. So I guess that's that part of the AI. Either way, do you think news outlets are sort of being transparent about their use of AI?
I think that they're trying to be, and I think part of where we are right now in the media landscape is figuring out what that transparency looks like. So I've done some studies where we've kind of done experimental social science studies looking at, if you show somebody a news article and you tell them it was written by AI versus you tell them it wasn't, how do they perceive the content? And part of what we're finding in those kind of studies is that we don't have great language for describing, for being transparent about AI use. So for example, when we say AI, was a assistant, or AI was being used as a tool here, that sounds transparent from the perspective of a journalist and a journalism professor. but it's not super clear what people think that means. I think as a field, we don't quite have the language for, um, even if we want to be really transparent about what we're using AI for, we just haven't quite figured out, I think, how to do that or what to say about what we're doing in a way that readers will be able to understand and listeners will be able to understand. And that's not malicious. It's just because everything is new. So somebody's saying that they're using AI or this particular AI for this particular process. People just don't necessarily know what that means because it's new, right? So I think working toward being transparent about AI use is really important and where I think we should be going. But I think we're still in the development sort of area where it's not super clear what kind of language and what kind of information would be helpful, and also maybe what's like what information is too much information.
Yeah, because ultimately we do work in the industry of communication, and
correct.
when we're talking so much about AI, there's that call for transparency, but then of course you have something you don't want to do, which is confuse people when you are trying to give them the news, because they have to understand what's happening to be informed. And because we're talking today about how media is consumed by the masses, I thought we'd get out there and gather some tape of actual people talking about their news consumption. Renee Harris was somebody on her way into a Marshall's. Alyssa's out there in Kansas. I don't think you have a Marshall's out there. There's a Bell's Outlet, those kind of stores out there in the ether. But in Connecticut, sort of our place that gets some of the wholesale kind of clothing is Marshall's. And she was met by my booming voice asking her for an interview. Megan Rodriguez Hawkins and Davina Cordero were there with me producing the segment. Here's Renee Harris now.
There are certain news sites I really don't have much faith in. I hate to mention their names. I'm what you call a liberal, so I kind of gravitate towards that type of media, either online, the newspaper.
Renee Hobbs, Dr. Hobbs, there's so many different ways in which someone can receive information to the extent that it can become overwhelming. How can someone cut through the noise to find sources that are reliable and credible? I guess, how does it sound like Renee Harris is doing in her sort of critique of news media?
Well, Renee Harris has a couple of things right. She recognizes that journalism has standards like verification and accountability, and that there's other stuff that really looks like news but may have a partisan bent. So recognizing the rise of partisanship and partisan journalism in American society, that's one big step that Renee has taken as a news consumer.
According to a survey published in November by the News Literacy Project, 50% of teens believe that journalists make up information, and 60% believe that they take videos and photos out of context. Where do you believe, Alyssa, that this distrust comes from?
Yeah, so I think from a few different places. I think one, as we were just discussing, is the kind of proliferation of content where some of it is verified, trustworthy, following full journalistic, legal, ethical principles, professional content, and then also other content that's all being kind of shared on the same platforms and in the same medium. So I think some of the distrust is coming from just that information overload, but also that kind of proliferation of content. And I think also that we're expecting a lot of readers and listeners right now. And readers and listeners are all very smart people, but there's just a lot of kind of media literacy training and AI literacy training that we're sort of taking for granted or assuming that people have the information to kind of suss out all of this themselves and to be able to distinguish between this different type of content. So I think that's where some of the distrust is coming from.
Yeah, and sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Hobbs.
I was going to say that's a really good point, Alyssa, because I think it's important for news consumers to recognize the three kinds of things happening. There's journalism as we understand it. There's news adjacent content. That's the term I like to use for what you're talking about. It looks and feels like information, but it's optimized to pull your attention in. It's customized to link to your identity and to your interests, and also it's clickbait. manipulate. It's there's some profit motive there. And then there's yet another kind of content that people are dealing with, which is propaganda and disinformation. That takes it one step further. Those are intentionally designed to persuade or manipulate you. So sorting out those buckets, like you said, Frankie, it takes a lot of work.
To sort out that bucket and at least try to include, that is a great point. I like to, I'm thinking about it as journalism, then tabloid, and then sort of the propaganda. So where does AI fit into all of that? Because we've always had propaganda, of course. We've had it all the way back in time. But how is it, at least in this modern age, how AI is sort of impacting the conversation?
Well, AI is having a huge impact on that middle category. News adjacent content really is exploded in quantity because of AI, because that's a clipped podcast monologue. It's a stitched TikTok. It's a partisan explainer. It's a meme account. It's a AI narrated YouTube short. Those things are everywhere. A chatbot summary. All of those new genres or forms of news adjacent content, they're ubiquitous.
So is that something that's sort of,
them.
so is that something different from the past? I think I just want to kind of close the loop on this conversation. Yeah. So we talked about those three categories. Is it now that in 2026, category 3, propaganda and disinformation, maybe with AI being a tool, is sort of bleeding into that news adjacent content?
Yeah, and the second category, news adjacent content, is more and more created with the help of AI tools. So it's faster and quicker to produce those things than ever before. Back in the old days, if you wanted to do what you called tabloid content, a human had to create it.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
And I completely agree with Dr. Hobbs. I think the examples, Dr. Hobbs, that you were giving about the video and the TikTok and the audio, I think that's a big part of it too, is that AI can help replicate that, can fabricate, right, the audio and video clips, which is different than kind of in a previous era where, yes, you could write text, but somebody could still kind of go out into the world and verify, is there a video of that politician saying that thing, right? Like, can we find audio from that event that I didn't go to? Once you can fabricate the audio and the video, that makes it a lot more difficult to do that verification.
Renee, you work. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's such a good point, because I think these new forms of news adjacent content, when they're created by AI, they give news consumers the feeling of being informed, but there's no discipline of verification behind that. And so that is a dangerous place.
Destiny Brown was another person that agreed to talk to us when we asked people at this Enfield, Connecticut shopping mall for comment on media consumption. Here's how Brown says she interfaces with artificial intelligence.
I think it's like depending on your universe and the industry you're in. I wouldn't say it's necessarily bad. I wouldn't say it's necessarily good. I'm just a regular person, so I just use it for my Gmail.
That's one person's view of AI, Alyssa, and how it can be used. Based on how much uncertainty there is, though, on AI, how it can and should be used, do you feel that there should be a set of standards for how it can be employed? What might those standards look like? I'm sure lawmakers are having this conversation as we speak. We know they are in Connecticut.
That's a great question. I personally think that legal and ethical standards are going to be needed to be created in order to figure out where this fits in. From an education standpoint, we're certainly talking about this in university settings about what sort of school work we're encouraging students to use AI for versus encouraging them not to use AI for, and where that fits in. So yes, I will say I don't know exactly what those standards should and shouldn't be, but I think transparency is going to be one of them.
You and everyone else, it sounds like. We've had these conversations a lot at the local level here, and we've been talking about this legislation for some time now, but a little different in Connecticut with how our government operates. We call it the land of steady habits here in Connecticut, as Renee Hobbs may be aware of. But there's a lot of talk around news media literacy. So what actually is this, and how is it evolving with AI?
So Frankie, I want to make a point. I want to answer that question, but I want to comment on the really nice soundbite that you used from that person at the mall, because she said something that we haven't yet talked about that I think has to be understood as part of AI literacy and media literacy. She said, "Well, the stuff that I get is all great." So she has some understanding, more or less, that AI is being used to personalize content. So when people think AI, they think they think fabricated animated cats, or stuff that the politicians are putting out now about the war, right? Where AI is created the content. But AI is also part of the process of personalizing content and controlling your feed. And people may or may not know why they're seeing certain stories, why one source is elevated over another, or how their own behavior is shaping their actions. So I heard that news consumer talk a little bit about how she's kind of curated her feed. She's fine with it, like depending on what industry, depending what your interests are. And I feel like we all need to be more metacognitive about how AI personalization is shaping our understanding of the world by the algorithmically presented choices that are made. And that is a part of media and AI literacy.
Metacognitive, that's the next band name I'm adding into the ether. There's a lot of talk around media literacy. So I asked you this question, but let's get into this a little further. What actually is it, and how does it evolve with AI? I know we talked about metacognition there, but just help us understand more from what people can do to actually sort of understand what they're taking in.
Sure. Media literacy is an expanded way of thinking about literacy: reading, writing, speaking, listening. And now it means being able to understand and what's happening in messages that are coming across, being able to reflect on their impact on individuals and society, and to be able to create media and participate in democracy through the strategic communication. So expanding literacy to include critical thinking, reflection on media's impact and its role in our identity as creators, as collaborators, and as civic actors in a democracy.
Alyssa, we talked a little bit about a set of standards that could be employed earlier. I just want to finish up the segment by asking you this. What do you feel can be done? I know we were talking about standards, but is there anything else that could sort of be done to allow people to gain more trust in news outlets at this time?
I think the media literacy discussion we were just having is a big part of that. I think once people, which a lot of people are, right, including your listeners, but once we're having people pay more attention to where their information came from, when that information was published, who's being cited in that article, who's being interviewed in that segment. Like once people are really able to identify those different elements that make a media content credible, I think that helps with this larger discussion about finding the kinds of content that they are able to trust.
Maybe people being more deliberate about their process, as we're seeing now. I listen to New York Times and NPR every morning, and pretty much you're hearing more process-based promotion and things like that. All right, from Connecticut Public Radio, I want to say that this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. Folks can give us a call, 888-720-9677 if they want to participate. You can also hit us up on our YouTube stream. Alyssa Appelman, professor at Kansas University, and Renee Hobbs, professor at URI. They're going to stay with us for the next segment. After the break, we're going to hear from experts like these guys. Obviously, these are the experts AI is having on politics, including what many are saying is the first ever AI-fueled war in Iran. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Earlier, we talked about the increasing presence of AI from social media feeds to newsrooms as doubt rises on the trustworthiness of news and even information itself. We'll look at how users and journalists can combat this. Back with us is Alyssa Appelman, an associate professor in the William White School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Kansas University, and then Renee Hobbs, a professor of communication at the Harrington School of Communication and Media at the University of Rhode Island. Folks, you can give us a call, join the conversation. Do you believe AI is a good or bad thing in today's information economy? Give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Renee, as practically everyone is now able to create and engage with information through social media, what type of content are we seeing? Do the memes sort of play into this distortion of information too? Should it exist?
Well, it's interesting. I would say there are two forms of expression and communication that are now on the rise because of AI, and both of them have a powerful impact on, especially on young people today. The first one I would say is social influencers. Every child in America wants to be a YouTuber when they grow up, right?
Both my kids.
and there's a real good reason for that, right? Which is they are perceived as very trustworthy and believable. Their authority doesn't come from their expertise, like how much they know or what degrees they have. Their authority comes from their charisma, their relatability, right? They're just like us. And AI makes it easier for those people to pump out the volume of content that's going on. And then there's memes. And memes are really a kind of old school. Actually, they're an old school. By internet years, they've been around, since the beginning, right? And now memes are powerful because you really are just remixing, right? You're remixing and putting together a message almost always through just a combination of emotionally compelling images. And basically, people are conversing in memes the same way that people are conversing in emojis, right? People are conversing in memes.
Alyssa, what did you think about that?
I had not heard that comparison between memes and emojis, but I think that's a very interesting. I agree. I think that's what's going on. It's an interesting conversation because 10, 15 years ago, we were talking about how younger people are not, we're not engaged in like current events. And I don't think that's the case anymore. So I do think that there's a lot of engagement. And I think that we should be excited that there's so many people, right, who are interested in what's going on in the world. I think it's figuring out how to kind of harness that energy and make sure that the kind of information that they're getting is accurate and verified and, corrected if it's wrong and things like that. But I do think that there is an element of, I guess my optimistic side says there is something really positive that there's so many people and younger people who are really interested in current events and what's going on in the world.
I want you all. Go ahead, Renee. Yeah, jump in there.
I was just going to say, influencers can help be like an on-ramp to caring about news and current events.
Yeah, there's two sides of that coin. They can also influence you to buy products and things like that. There is the fun side of it where the kids are saying, "Hey, we're going to make a YouTube video, Dad, Charlie, and Annie," and then I walk near the shot and they go, "Oh, it's just our dad." By the way, anyway, guys. That's cute when they do that. There's also experiences that we've found to be negative, but I guess that's where it becomes incumbent on the adults, right, to actually teach children and maybe help with some of that media literacy.
Yeah. One of the things we like to ask teachers to do is ask students to identify their favorite influencers. And now we have a conversation about why do you like them? What makes them compelling? What makes them trustworthy? And that creates a very lively discussion that invites us to think about how do we decide who and what to trust? And that's a really powerful discussion to be having today.
I appreciate that. I'll also take that into my bank of ideas so that I could apply that into my personal life. I want you to take those two things where we talk about social influencers, we talk about memes, and apply them. This is the ultimate work that you all are about to do, and apply them to the war in Iran. What are you seeing that might be something that you're storing in the back of your head as you go, or taking notes on, that sort of involves this new age media, and apply it to what's happening with this very classic sort of conflict that we're having with the United States and Iran? Memes maybe that we're seeing, or something like that, or we're calling it the AI fueled war. Right. Is there anything either of you are seeing in that regard?
Well, you know the old saying, right? That truth is the first casualty in wartime. And so memes are one way of shaping people's perceptions of reality. Is Iran completely demolished and unable to fight back, or do they still have capacity to fight back? Well, right now, the White House and the Iranian government are in a meme war about that, trying to control our perceptions of reality about whether Iran's capacity for war is how significant it is. And that ability for wartime propaganda to control people's understanding of reality is something everybody needs to be really aware of right now. And that's why it's really challenging for us to distinguish between information and news adjacent content and propaganda, because it's all really blurry, right? All three of those forms are participating in the shaping of reality.
And then as we're talking about, Alyssa, did you want to respond? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I agree. I think the blurring of these categories is a big part of the problem. And something that Dr. Hobbs had said earlier, I think is really relevant here too, about the kind of personalization, customization element of the AI algorithms. Part of what we haven't really discussed in this conversation is the fact that certain people are getting information based on other information they've liked before, right? So your feeds are curated based on the other types of content that you're consuming, which means that different people are getting different information, right? Which is part of what leads to this kind of lack of ability to communicate, and some of this like incivility, is that people are, it's sort of in there, we call it like the filter bubble, right? Like people have that selective exposure where they're only seeing content that relates to other content that they've seen before. So that was just the point I was going to add.
AI getting increasingly harder to spot. Following the U.S. seizure of former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in January, AI videos and images began circulating online. I think one of the videos was reposted by Elon Musk to his X account, which has about 238 million followers. When something like this happens, what does this mean, Dr. Hobbs, for the future of media literacy?
Right. Well, it turns out that it's just like the fake news crisis of 2016 was really good for media literacy education, right? It really helped get it on the radar screen. Everybody now understands how important it is. The kind of disinformation that we're seeing in the wartime is absolutely creating a lot of momentum for media literacy. I'm really excited about the upcoming test of media literacy competencies that's going to be rolling out in 2029. Connecticut NPR viewers should know that the OECD, which is a European think tank that has a big influence on education policy, they've made a commitment to create a 1-hour online assessment called Media and AI Literacy. It's like a game. It's a test that puts you in a situation of being a scenario. Like, let's say you're an intern at a journalism organization, or let's say you're helping with a social media strategy. And it invites kids to demonstrate their ability to engage in verification, in lateral reading, in comparing and contrasting the quality of information, in recognizing when emotions are used to push people's buttons. And so all of those competencies are going to be increasingly more like something we expect that high school students and all adults should be able to do.
should be able to do? Is this something that's going to be widely available for organizations maybe to use in training, or is it going to go to schools? Is it going to be on a website? Like, how can people consume it?
Well, at first it'll be a research test of 800,000 15-year-olds in 100 countries. Whew. That's the mechanism by which the tests produce a reporting that says, oh, the best education system, Finland. Next up, Singapore. Further down, the United States. What that will do is create the momentum for what you're pointing out, Frankie, the need for curriculum resources and teacher training and consultation. So that's coming down the pike. And if you think about it, AI is pretty new. So we're all still trying to figure out, what do students need to know about it? From my point of view, when it comes to the war madness that we're in right now, thinking about the power of the way that, we're influenced by not just facts, but also by feelings. And journalists have often really privileged facts over feelings. But the rise of social media influencers and memes is helping us understand that people decide what reality is based on facts and feelings.
Sounds like what you're digging into is an anthropological, I think that's the way you say it, conversation. And I think our producer, Megan Rodriguez Hawkins, would really appreciate that kind of a conversation. When we're out in Enfield getting sound in advance of this show, we met Garth Mickelson. Garth says he used to admire user-generated art on the web, but he's grown wary of it.
When AI art first came out, you could tell because there was like little wonky details. There was like a lot of inaccuracies, but now it's gotten so good that you really have to know a subject when you're looking at an AI picture or video to know that you're being spoofed. And that's really what a lot of these are. It's not like, oh, I'm presenting you this video and this is an artist's conception, recreation of something that happened. No, they're presenting it as this is actual reality.
Considering what we just heard from Garth, and he's standing out there against a post just to give people a place at the shopping mall. He's right outside of a Barnes & Noble in Enfield, Connecticut. What's the best course of action, folks, for people who do not have the time to discern fact from fiction and aren't necessarily going to be looking for that courtesy caption that says artist rendering or conception or something like that?
I think the AI video elements that he's talking about are very spot on. I teach an information literacy undergraduate class at the University of Kansas. And one of the things we used to look at was some of these videos and talking as a group about what are the tells that this might be an AI video. And that conversation has changed over the years because those videos have gotten more elaborate. I think some of the media literacy techniques that were mentioned, some of the lateral reading, which is what we talk about of like, let's find the same information somewhere else and see if we can verify that information. If I go to a different news source that I trust, or a couple of other news sources that I trust, it doesn't have to take a super long time, but even just a little bit of a search on a couple other sites. Are other people reporting this too? Have other people, seen the same video? And if nobody else is running this, if this is the only place where this information is, I would be more skeptical of the information.
Yeah, I agree with that. We would say that you're asking not just, is this true or is this AI generated, but who made it? What's their purpose? What do they, why are they sharing it? From my point of view, this question about, AI art and its authenticity, its creativity, or its originality reminds me of, I'm not so worried about it, I guess, Frankie. And that's partly because I'm so old. I'm old enough to remember when Photoshop was a new thing. Do you remember that? You were a baby, I bet. Oh, maybe you weren't even born yet.
I use Photoshop. We also want to bring back to our conversation at the Marshalls in Enfield. I want you guys to hear this clip with Renee Harris, the news consumer who calls herself a liberal, and her thoughts on artificial intelligence. Let's roll that clip.
I'm terrified by AI because I'm afraid that so many of the next generation, they're not going to have jobs. I feel that AI is going to just take over the world. You don't know whether it's truthful or not, so that's what my big concern is, especially when you see AI that can impersonate human beings. That's very concerning for me.
Dr. Appleman, you had a tip there earlier, but how can journalists mitigate this fear that Renee Harris has? Can they?
I think it's a very legitimate fear, and it's something that we certainly talk about in educational settings, as well as preparing students for this new world that we're not sure exactly what it's going to look like. We've been talking a lot, the phrase we keep using is AI as a tool. So AI as a tool for journalists to use in their work, for professionals to use in other work, not as a replacement for human labor. But I agree. We're not sure exactly what that looks like, and it's evolving, and we're all trying to figure that out together.
Yeah, I think what we have to appreciate is that it will widen the gap, because humans plus AI is gonna make productivity just on steroids. And so the gap between what you can do with AI and what you can do without it is going to widen that gap, and that means there are going to be people who aren't able to use AI skillfully. One of the things I like to do with my students is demonstrate to them how they can use a super prompt. That's a special set of instructions that you give AI that structures the results you receive. And they have this aha where they go, oh, I was just typing my question in and getting bullshit back. But when I use a super prompt and when I structure results in a way that really accelerates my thinking, I really increase my productivity. So I feel like that it's a big crisis coming, but there always will be the need for people who can use AI in a productive way, and then that'll protect them. That'll protect them from any job change dynamics happening in the world.
What about their worldviews? So there's employment and things like that, but then I guess there's the political end of the spectrum.
Yeah. Well, of course, that thing I worry about most, of course, is, AI didn't create the problem of partisan news, did it? Right? Partisan news was a phenomenon going back to, depending on if you're a historian, you could say to the founding of this country, when we wrote the First Amendment to protect partisan news, right? So partisan news has long been a phenomenon that has increasingly had impact on our democracy and our understanding of the world. And I feel like AI has just upped the game. But we wouldn't want to blame AI for the problem of partisan news and the way in which it's divided our country into people with very different understandings of what reality is. And of course, there are a lot of ways to fix that, Frankie. But they all take what I call intellectual humility.
Humility. Some other thing you've talked about is in your book, Mind Over Media, Propaganda Education for a Digital Age. I want to get that right. Mind Over Media, Propaganda Education for a Digital Age. You talk about AI as almost the perfect tool for propaganda. Sounds sinister. Can you briefly discuss how AI functions within contemporary propaganda and why you say it that way? Perfect tool.
It's a perfect tool, right? Because AI propaganda and AI is tapping into the fact that trust in journalism is eroded, and it allows anyone. It's like a force multiplier, right? It speeds up content production. So it lets a propagandist be first and fast. And we know, we humans, we have this kind of bias, which is the first thing we hear kind of sticks. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It's why fact checking has always only been marginally effective when it comes to news, because whatever you heard first is going to shape your reality. And so propaganda is the perfect tool because of the way it allows people to speedily frame events in ways that benefit the propagandist.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. You've been listening to Alyssa Appleman, Associate Professor in the William White School of Journalism at Kansas University. So thankful that you came on the show today. It was really nice to meet you, Dr. Appleman.
Thank you so much for having me. It was nice to meet you too.
And Renee Hobbs, a professor of communication at the Harrington School of Communication and Media at the University of Rhode Island. Thank you so much for joining us.
I really enjoyed it, Frankie. Thanks.
After the break, we're going to talk about how Connecticut lawmakers are responding to concerns about online safety, mostly at the national level, also some of the local level a little bit. What's this mean for our kids? Hit us up, 888-720-9677. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We spent the show talking about distrust of news outlets and AI-generated content. We're going to talk about how federal lawmakers are joining into the conversation, how they're talking about protecting kids online. And who knows, maybe we'll talk one more time and do the Graziano-Hagan Federal Budget Resolution Invitational one more time, as we have my good friend joining us from Capitol Hill right now, Lisa Hagan, federal policy reporter for Connecticut Public and the Connecticut Mirror. Thank you so much for being here, Lisa.
Thanks for having me, as always, Frankie.
Federal lawmakers, they always have a lot of business to attend to, so much so that it seems like sometimes they're putting off this conversation. How are they acting in regards to artificial intelligence? Are they embracing its capabilities, or are they more worried about that other part of the conversation, which is AI-generated images from bad actors?
I think they're trying to strike a balance. And I think it's this kind of tug of war between federal side and states, because, you're seeing a lot of action happening stateside. Typically, states know best what they should do for their people. And Congress, frankly, takes a long time to implement new measures, especially around newer things like AI. And so obviously we've seen the proliferation of AI. It's gotten really popular in the last few years, and it's becoming part of daily life, as you guys spoke about on previous segments. And so, now we're seeing the Trump administration kind of wading into this a bit more at the federal level, and he's trying to set the tone at the top. And so it's finding ways of embracing AI in a lot of ways, and also implementing some protections. But I think it kind of emanates from a fact that the federal government is fearful that states could stymie innovation based on different patchwork of laws they're doing. Obviously, each state is going to decide what it thinks is best, and it's all going to do different things. And so there's that fear at the federal level, at least from the executive branch. And they want people to be able to gain skills on AI because, again, it's just become such a interwoven part of our daily life. But you're also seeing federal lawmakers looking for ways to regulate it, and they've been trying to do so for the past couple of years. But I think, again, by President Trump setting the tone at the top and trying to find a national framework and a national law, that could really change some things and really change how federal lawmakers try to regulate or expand AI.
And looking at how the federal government looks at what's happening at the state level, you had Senate Democrat here in Connecticut at the local state government level, Bob Duff. He wrote a letter to Congress asking them not to strip the states of their ability to hold social media companies accountable for their addictive products. Kind of goes into that same bucket, which people might be thinking, hey, AI could come from an actor. It could be from a user generating an image. But at the same time, we're always talking about online safety, and then we're talking about Facebook, and we're talking about the other media companies. Why does that always happen? Is it that we always think it's the responsibility of the media companies to sort of gatekeep what comes in and what comes out? And then I guess in that regard, is it now, or is there still that effort to sort of keep these media companies hold their feet to the fire to have them do it?
Yeah, and I think we're kind of seeing that play out on a federal level. I mean, we've seen Congress and a lot of the time the senator from Connecticut, Richard Blumenthal, trying to hold a lot of these media companies and these CEOs accountable. They've come before Congress a few times now, especially when it comes to safety of children and minors on social media. So that's not just on AI, but obviously AI is a huge part of social media and just all of our internet experiences. And so you're seeing Congress, I think, try to really ramp up pressure on media companies to take accountability for this, to protect minors online. And I know Meta, in terms of Facebook and Instagram, they've done their own kind of protections for minors. They've done teen accounts and other ways of trying to regulate minors' experiences online. But, Congress would like to codify that into federal law. But again, you're going to see this kind of push and pull, I think, play out over the next few months of what role does the federal government play in all of this? And again, from I think a Trump administration perspective, not stymieing AI innovation and having the U.S., maybe lose its way in the competition of this.
You had said Blumenthal earlier. I think it was him and Marsha Blackburn, actually, the Republican from Tennessee, who had co-sponsored legislation a few years back called the Kids Online Safety Act, colloquially known as KOSA, as we often use acronyms here at the federal and local government levels. Is that thing still around? Is it still kicking around? Is that any chance of passage any of these years, I guess?
It's still kicking around. I've been covering it the last couple of sessions that I've been covering Connecticut from DC. It is the one issue in Congress, one rare issue where I feel like there is consensus around wanting to do something to protect children, teens, and anyone kind of under 18 online. Like that is there is consensus on that. It just remains on how does Congress get there, and so. KOSA, Kids Online Safety Act, on the Senate side, had gotten through last session, overwhelming bipartisan support. And the House is kind of doing its own version of that. And so they've kind of taken components of KOSA and kind of jammed it into other big digital safety kind of legislation for kids. And so, again, there's going to be this kind of fight play out between the Senate and the House of just what to do with KOSA. And I know for Senator Blumenthal, he thinks what the House is doing is a bit of a watered down version, but there are still real concerns, whether it be on First Amendment rights with Kids Online Safety Act, that could, make it difficult to get it across the finish line again.
Oftentimes, Lisa and I on the show will try to illustrate why it's hard for lawmakers to do certain things because they're up against a certain calendar. And then, of course, they're always campaigning because, particularly in the House, you have to run every 2 years for office. And then, of course, there's what we see now with another continuing resolution to fund the government until September for most of the government. But last question for you, Lisa. You got about a minute and a half to do this for us. Help us understand what's going on now with this partial government shutdown involving the Department of Homeland Security, which includes places like, agencies like TSA, the people that are helping us get in and out of airports.
And just to quickly link it back to KOSA, I mean, this is why it's so difficult for Congress to be able to tackle issues like KOSA because they're having to do other really time-sensitive things like funding the federal government. And so we're kind of in this shutdown position yet again, third time in probably about 6 months. It's only one agency this time for DHS, but we're basically sitting in shutdown limbo at this point because Congress is out for the next 2 weeks because of 2 holidays. And so they left town with the Senate passing its own legislation, the House passing its own legislation, and no one resolving it. So I think over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be waiting and seeing what happens with DHS. And it seems like, at least as of right now, TSA agents are getting paid. Just
quickly, there was that partial funding resolution that came down from the president?
It was an executive action to pay and provide back pay. So Congress, again, has just left everyone kind of in limbo about funding DHS.
Lisa Hagen, federal policy reporter for Connecticut Public and the Connecticut Mirror. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Frankie.
So great to have you on. Today's show was produced by Megan Rodriguez-Hawkins and Tale Ricketson. Thank you so much for doing the show. Thank you so much to Davina Cordero as well for getting some of this tape with us. Edited by Patrick Scale. Dylan Reyes is our technical producer. Thank you so much to Tess Terrible, Megan Fitzgerald, and the rest of our team. Megan Boone. Download The Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse.